All right, everyone. So today's class on partials, and really, I guess the entire morning here is all about best practices when it comes to code. So like, how can we refactor our code to adhere to our MVC principles? And I would kind of back to the beginning of the mod when we introduced MVC. We talked about how MVC is really just an application of SRP, how we want all the parts of our application to have a single responsibility. So we're going to do something similar this morning, and we're going to talk about the principle of drive. So I've got two questions for y'all that I'm going to just drop in the chat so you have easy access to them. So the two questions are: thinking about plain Ruby, what are some strategies we can use to dry up our code within a class? And then what are some strategies to dry up code from multiple classes where there might be shared behavior? I'm gonna put you into some breakout rooms, and I'm gonna give you all, let's say, I'm gonna give you all, not a lot of time, I'm gonna give you 4 minutes to discuss this. All right, welcome back, everybody. I want to get some thoughts on this. So for either of the two questions there, drawing up code within a class or across multiple classes, let's hear from, I'm going to take some random volunteers. Jeremiah, what'd y'all talk about?
We talked about, I guess, in a single class, we could like make helper methods so we don't have to repeat ourselves like further along in the code.
Great, helper methods. Trevor S., what did you all talk about?
We talked a little bit about refactoring as well, making sure that you're using MVC correctly, and or practicing MVC, I should say, and making sure that you're factoring your actions and inside of your controller, nice and neat.
Yeah, that is all true. I do want to point out that you're talking about Rails specifically. And that's okay that you're thinking about this in Rails, but I do want to make the distinction of like some of these principles that we're talking about aren't just Rails specific. We can apply them to Ruby and really any object-oriented language. Let's hear from Brisa. What did you all talk about?
Okay, so we were kind of talking a little bit about the project and how we would be using the partials in here. So we got into like the index view and how saying that one index view is going to render the portion of here is the button to click on applying for a pet. And then another partial view is going to render the button for you accepted this pet. Now go ahead and add a description as to why you are a qualifier for this pet. And just like leveling it out in multiple ways just to make it easier, and you can manipulate it later too based on the MVC principles.
Yeah, I love that. You're really thinking forward to like what's the application of what we're talking about today, partials. Yeah, that's great. I definitely want to circle back to that towards the end of class. Let's hear from a couple more people. Jenny, what did you all talk about?
We talked about modules and inheritance, and we even went into a little bit of the last project with Ruby on Rails and how we dried up some code within our models. So,
which when it comes to there were two questions. So it was like drawing code within a class and drawing up code between classes. Which one does modules and inheritance fall under?
say that again. Between a class and.
Yeah, is my audio coming through okay for y'all?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no, you're good. So is inheritance and modules, is that how you would drive code within a class or between multiple classes?
Multiple.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that we hit on the two big ideas here for when we're drawing up code within a class, breaking things up into helper methods, pulling out that repeated code. So like I have method 1, method 2, both of them have repeated code. I pull out that repeated code into another helper method. That's a good strategy for drawing up code within a class. And then for between classes, like Jenny was saying, creating some sort of inheritance structure so that we have one class that shares the code from multiple classes. So really when it comes to drawing up code, we have very similar approaches. We always want to identify the repeated code and pull it out into one place that can be reused in multiple places. And that's exactly what we're going to do with partials today. So the next thing I'm going to have you all do is read some of the Rails guides. So let me just share my screen here. And so we just did these two discussion questions. So what I want you all to do is I want you to work through these portions of the lesson plan, and I'll just drop this directly into your cohort channel. So I want everybody to, so I guess before we do this, the one thing that I want to say is like, yes, we want to talk about partials today and strategies for like organizing our code, drawing up our code, etc. But I would say there's maybe a it's not even really a secondary learning goal. I would say it's maybe like another primary learning goal of we really want to push you all towards reading documentation. So we can teach you like the basics of how to do Rails and how to how to program or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, our goal as instructors is to put the tools in your hands to learn whatever it is that you need to do, whatever you might need to do on the job. There's so many things that we just can't cover all of them at Turing. So one skill that we really want to work on building is reading through technical documentation. I think technical documentation can be very intimidating. I've been programming for 8-9 years or something like that, and it's I still walk into docs and I'm like, oh, this is intimidating, let me go find something else. So I think being very intentional with like trying to read through technical documentation is a great way to stretch yourself. So to that end, I'm going to give you all a couple minutes to start reading. And again, I dropped those in the cohort channel, or you can find them here in the lesson plan as well. Let's take another 2 minutes on our own, and we'll talk about it together. All right, so let's go ahead and come back together. And I want to open it up. Did any questions come up as you were reading through those docs? Okay, then. Well, I'm going to go ahead and, oh, Kwa.
Can you explain to me a little bit about the model in there?
Mhm.
I didn't quite get the model and the search. Is that a params or is that related to the actual model?
So let's find where we're looking. Right here.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I just by like head nods, what is anybody else like confused by some of the stuff they saw in this section? Yeah, and I would say like I was also I was just reading through this as you all were reading through it, and I didn't necessarily understand everything that I read here. So that's just to say that as you're reading through technical documentation, a lot of times we don't necessarily like understand everything, and that is a good. I think what happens in our brains is saying like, oh, this is like unfamiliar territory, like let me back out of this. And that's just like a very common experience. So something that I want to point out was when I see something like, as seen in the previous sections of this guide, yield is a very powerful tool. Well, I haven't read those sections yet, so I might have to go back and read something before I can understand what's going on in here. Kwa, to answer your question, this model, the way that this works, and we will have a separate, we will have a class on binding models to forms, which is what this is right here. The short explanation is that this, we've used form with the URL and the method arguments. This infers what URL and method it should use based on the model. So that's how this works. But again, this is not like the super important. So if this is not quite making sense, that's okay. That's to be expected.
Okay, thank you.
Trevor.
Yeah, this is slightly unrelated, but with reading Ruby on Rails guides, in the top right corner on that ribbon, it says version 6.1.3.
Yeah.
Reading through these things, is this ribbon version on the top right corner, is this like a large indicator on what we should or should not be reading?
Yeah, and so if I go back and look at this link right here, it looks like I'm looking at my bottom left screen there. It just takes me to guides.rubyonrails.org. And yeah, that's a really good point, Trevor. When you're reading through this documentation, you want to make sure that you're on the version that's most relevant to you. So I might actually, for the Rails guide specifically, I can show you how to do this. We can go to, this is how I do it, guides, and then click on Rails 5.2. So we don't really want to be on 6.0. And then we'll see that when we look at our URL here, it changes to guides.rubyonrails.org/v5.2. And then if we click on something else, we actually don't see that banner anymore at all, which is interesting. So yeah, this is how I would do it. If I look at, if I search for like partials here, I can look, it'll take me to this layouts and rendering. And I would say this is the more appropriate guide to be looking at. Let's do a search for partials. Yeah, 3.4 using partials. So I would say this is like the more, this is like the better thing for us to be looking at. But this section I think is going to be almost exactly the same as what's in the version 6. So the short answer, Trevor, is like, yes, you should always be looking at the correct version that you're using, especially of Rails. But for this particular exercise, it's not going to make a difference. So a lot of times that will happen. Like version 6 and version 5.2 are identical in this area.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Other questions that are coming up from these docs? Cool. I think that was a good exercise to start off with. I wanted to make sure to make that we made some space in this mod to look at some documentation together and kind of like pull it apart and talk about like what things you should pay attention to, what things you shouldn't pay attention to. And like sometimes you're going to run into things where you might not necessarily understand everything that it's talking about. And being able to like kind of sift through what's important, what's not important, and find the things that are relevant, that is a skill we want to develop. So let's go ahead and take a POM here. When we come back, I'll implement a partial, and then I'll give you all a chance to do it in your project. So let's come back at 10:35. All right, so give folks another minute to jump back on. Just a reminder to turn those videos back on as you come back from the pond. And there was one other thing I wanted to talk about from these docs. Did anybody get to this line when it says one way to use partials is to treat them as the equivalent of subroutines? Did anyone get to that line and think like, what the heck is a subroutine? Maybe, yes. Qua says raise hand. Yeah, so I think that this, like, I had a similar experience when I read this and I was like, subroutine, what does that mean? And this is a great example of like technical jargon being intimidating. And so what I would recommend is when you get to something like this, that maybe like you just do a quick Google of like, what does this word mean, rather than just like blowing past it. And I want to point out the difference between this, the equivalent of subroutines, versus something like, as seen in previous sections of this guide, yield is a very powerful tool. I can see that yield is like kind of italicized here, and it's actually rendered as a code block, versus this is just kind of talking about this word without any other context. So I'm kind of using my context clues here to say like, yield seems like it's like a code Ruby specific thing, but subroutines here, feels like more of a general term. So when you run into a term like this, it might be good to do a quick Google, like subroutines, and then maybe like computer science. In computer programming, a subroutine is a sequence of program instructions that performs a specific task packaged as a unit. This unit can then be used in programs wherever that particular task should be performed. Does anybody, given that definition, does anybody have maybe like a more accessible term for a subroutine? Maybe something that we've already talked about today in class.
Can you translate that to English first before I can maybe relate?
Well, that's what I'm hoping that we can do together. Kyle, what do you think?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yeah.
It would almost be like calling a method that contains several other helper methods. And so just by like calling one thing, all the other methods are neatly packaged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is essentially talking about helper methods when we're applying it to Ruby. So a sequence of program instructions, well, that's like lines of code that perform a specific task packaged as a unit. Well, when we talk about packaging lines of code as a unit in Ruby, we're just talking about making a method. And then this unit or method can be used in programs wherever that particular task should be performed. That's just talking about reusing your helper methods. So this is a really good example of how like the technical definitions are like really not very accessible to us, but it's not like we don't understand this. We just need to take a minute to like try to apply this and connect it to something that we already know, something like helper methods. And I will just say like, this is not easy. Everything that I'm talking about with like reading technical documentation, it's not easy. That's why I want to do a little bit of that practice together. Let's go ahead and move on to the actual content here and talk about partials. So you all read a little bit about partials. I'm going to implement a partial and show you how to do that. And then I'm going to give you all a good chunk of work time for the rest of the morning to implement it in your project and kind of like share out with the group. So it'll be kind of like a loose structured class after that. Okay. So one of my strategies here as I'm like trying to learn something new is that I want to take it one step at a time. So I see something like to render a partial as part of a view, you can use the render method within the view, a render menu. This will render a file named _menu.html.erb at that point within the view being rendered. So let's try this. So let's just take this code. We'll drop it into this new form right here. And let's just see what that does. I would expect that if I'm trying to like, it said something about, it'll render a file named _menu. Well, I haven't created that file. So let's just see if it says like, I'm trying to render this file, but I can't do it. So that would be like a very, very small step in the right direction. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm actually just going to go to the server. So when it comes to learning something new, usually I'm not going to start with tests because that just kind of like, that's like another thing. Well, I have to learn the thing and how to test it. So when I'm just trying to learn the concept, let's just look at it in development. And let's go to that new form. So that was my artist new form. And what do we get? Action view missing template in artist new. This is kind of hard to read. Let's look at it in the terminal over here. So we say missing partial artists menu. And so that's telling me exactly where I need to define it. So under artists, we'll create a new file called something like underscore menu.html.erb. So now we'll go back over here, refresh this page, and now we don't get any errors. So we've successfully rendered a partial. So what we've covered so far is to render a partial, you use this render helper method here. So notice this is inside ERB tag. So we're calling a Ruby method. So I could, refactor this or just change this by putting parentheses just to really show. This is a method that we're calling, and we're passing the name of the file we're trying to render. But with partials, there's kind of some funky syntax where it's actually underscore and then the file name, and Rails or the view helpers or the view just knows that when it's rendering a partial to look for that file name with an underscore in it. So the next thing I want to do here is let's go to our partial here and let's just add in some like HTML to test this. So now that we've rendered this without an error, let's see if we can just get this header to display. So I refresh it, and now my partial is now being rendered within this view. So essentially partials, we've made helper methods for our views. We've said, oh, well, I want to call this view within another view the same way I might call a helper method within another method. So what I want to do is I want to identify repeated code. So in this case, it's going to be these two forms. So this is a very common use case for partials. We've got forms for edit the bottom one's edit, the top one's new, and they look very, very identical. So we're going to try to dry up this code by moving some of it over to a partial. Okay, so now that I know how to render this menu thing, let's delete this file. And let's do something very similar, trying to render something called underscore form. So I want to have just like a single form that I can render from both the edit and the new actions. So let's redo what we did with the file name we want, and we'll say underscore form.html.erb for artists. And so I've got on the right here, I've got my two views I'm trying to refactor. On the left, here's the place where I'm going to put the repeated code. So I'm going to move some of this code over here. And I'll go ahead and just move this other form side by side. And what we can see, I don't like that highlighting. There we go. So what we can see with this repeated code is that it's not completely repeated. So when it comes to trying to dry up code, oftentimes what we want to do is identify what's unique to each of these blocks of code and pass those in as arguments. So in this case, the URL is different for both of them. So for create, we're going to /artists. For update, we're going to artists, and then we're passing the artist ID. The method for the create is post, and the method for update is patch. And then the third thing that's different is the button text. So when we're creating, the button says create artists. When we're updating, it says update artist. So I'm going to need to pass some information into my view. So that's maybe the next thing that I want to try to do is see if I can just successfully pass some information over to the view. And that would be, if I look at my docs, there's a section here for passing local variables. You'll notice in here, there's some other syntax for partial form here. And so I think I might actually need to use that, but it looks like I can also pass local variables like this. So I could come in here and try to add in this option. And of course, I don't have something called @zone here. So let's just try to do something like test and then pass it just like a random string, something like that. And the way this is going to work is that this is going to create a local variable with the name of whatever is this key right here. And the value the variable is going to be pointing to whatever we assign it to in this hash. So we're passing a locals keyword argument, and the value to that, or the argument, is a hash where the key value pairs are local variables. So then I could try to do something similar that I did before with my H1. And now rather than just hard coding hello world in there, let's try to render our local variable of test and see what that does. So go back over here, refresh this. So we're going to get an error. It says missing partial artists underscore form. It looks like I added the underscore in here to the partial name. So I'll take that out and see if that fixes it. And I get wrong number of arguments on line 1. And that's interesting to me because arguments would indicate I'm trying to call a method, but I'm not trying to call a method. I'm trying to use a local variable, and I can see that test is highlighted. So I'm thinking maybe that's like a keyword I can't use. So let's call it test var instead. Something like that. And so this isn't quite working. I'm getting undefined local variable or method test var from artist new. And so that's not quite working. So let me try this. Let me go back over to my docs. And let me try this syntax. So this syntax is a little bit different. I see it has this partial keyword in here. So let's try that instead. So render partial form, and let's say locals test var, and let's just give it some random text. Okay, let's see what that does. There we go. Okay, so it looks like that different syntax did help me out here. Cool. So now I've kind of like, I've like incrementally built up all of the things that I need. I can render a partial, I can create a partial file, I can pass it some information. So now I think I'm ready to refactor this. So let's go ahead and move the duplicate code over from new HTML, or let me copy it over. Something like that. And let's take it out of new.html.erb right here. Cool, so I identified there's some things I'm gonna need to pass as arguments, like the path and everything. But for now, let's just leave it as is and see if we can render this form from new, and then we'll worry about using it in multiple views. So let's go back over here, let's refresh our new view, and our form is still there. So that is looking pretty good to me. So the next thing that I might do to double check this is just run my tests, because I know that I have a test for creating an artist. So I'll run bundle exec rspec, and all my tests are passing. So Jameson mentioned in the last class, red-green refactor. Red-green refactor is really the beauty of writing tests, or to me, it's what part of the beauty of writing tests. If I have tests that can confirm easily if something is still working, so I'm still in this green state. And then I might just want to double check, like if I accidentally make that mistake again and put the underscore in front of the form and run this, I'll see that my tests fail, which is a good thing. That tells me that my tests are indeed catching my mistakes that I'm making. So I can kind of use them as a safety net as I'm refactoring. All right. So the next thing I want to do is I want to try to pass in this path as a local variable. So let's call this path And then over here, when we're rendering this new form, we'll say path, and then we'll give it /artists. So can we pass this as a local variable and have it render inside of this block here? Cool, my tests are still passing. So let's go ahead and do that with the method as well. And let's just jump ahead and do it with the button text. So again, identifying what is different between the code I'm trying to dry up and passing those as variables. So method in my new is going to be a post, and the button text when I'm creating a new is going to be create artist. So let me run my tests again. And I'm still passing. So I think I've successfully rendered my, my partial from my new HTML ERB. So that was good, but I haven't quite dried up my code yet because my code is now just moved from the new view over to this underscore form partial, but I still have that repeated code under edit. So the real test is, can I render that partial from this other view as well? So here's where we're using our code, reusing our code. So in this case, the path should be /artists/ and then from my controller, I'm being passed an @artist. So I should be able to interpolate in here @artist.id. So that would be the path. The method is going to be patch when we're updating. And then the button text is going to be update artist. So we'll run this again, see if it's working. And so we get a failure here. And let's double check our failure. Undefined local variable or method path form HTML ERB line 1. Let's see, did I spell it wrong? It looks like local should be locals, just kind of comparing that with my one I have above. So I'm getting another failure here. Let's check this out. Unable to find link or button update artist. And I think that's because I just didn't capitalize update artist. So let's go update artist. And there we go. So I've successfully red green refactored everything. So I'm back to my green state, telling me that my partial refactor was successful. And so some other things I can do to refactor here, just to make this a little bit nicer, is this line is really long. So maybe I want to, for this hash syntax, just put each local variable onto its own line like that. And I'll do the same thing for edit. And I'll run my test just to double check. Cool. And then probably the last thing that I should do is I should go into Rails S, refresh my artist new form and make sure that's still looking good. And then can I also go to an edit? So click on edit here, and that form still looks good as well. And we can see the changed button text. All right, so that's everything I wanted to show you with partials for today. I'll go ahead and take some questions if anything came up for you all. What I want you to do right now is, not right now, but what I want you to do for the next hour until lunch is I want you to spend some time implementing partials in your project. Yeah, but I'll take questions first. Doug.
So one of the things that we've kind of done in the past is in our edit, we pass it a value so that the forms comes pre-filled out but in a new form, that value wouldn't exist. Is there a way to kind of tell it if nil, don't do anything, or kind of be able to pre-populate that form in the edit based on the partial?
I think you're muted, Brian.
Thank you. So something like this, Doug, where for our form, we want to say value and then whatever, maybe it's like at artist.name or something like that. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, so I think what I might do in this case is I might pass it. I mean, I guess I could do another variable here. So I could say like value is, maybe I'll call it initial name or something, or maybe just name. Name would probably be fine. And so then when I'm doing a new, my name is not going to be anything. So I'll just put empty string here. I think I need a comma right here. But then when we're doing the update, we want to pass it the current name of the artist. So at artist.name. Something like that. And I don't know if I have a test for that specific functionality, but I should be able to see it in my update artist here. So I refresh and I see the name is filled out right there. So that's one way to do it. I would say the more conventional way to do it is with that model option that Kwa pointed out earlier that we're going to get to we're going to get to shortly. Let me actually look at our calendar. When is that coming? Oh, that's going to be, okay, so that's Monday of week 5 is when we're planning to do that. So not quite next week, but early week 5. But I would say like, please feel free to push forward with your understanding of form with the model option. That will make doing things like this name and refactoring into partials a lot simpler. Genevieve.
So I had a couple questions. I guess for partials, is it convention to kind of do it when that partial is shared, or can you extract part of a page out that is only used on one page for a partial?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something that Brisa talked about earlier. Brisa, would you mind just repeating what you said earlier about that strategy?
Yeah, so basically the way that I saw it specifically for the project was to grab the search button and then put it on one partial form, and then grab the selected pet and then put that on another one. And then just keep on kind of simplifying it till there really only looks like there's 1 or 2 blocks of the form that you're looking for.
Yeah, Brisa, would you mind sharing your view from your project, and we can just kind of like.
I actually don't have one. I've been researching a lot, but I'm struggling a lot with this project, so I'm not at that point yet.
That's okay.
I have a partial, Brian, in mind.
Go for it, Genevieve.
Okay, give me 1 second here.
You said you've already implemented the partial?
Yeah, I have. So I would guess I was just trying to understand a bit more convention-wise, is that like it's okay to do it, use a partial, like maybe because I'm using an if statement to only display a section, even though that partial is only used within one page, for example, not necessarily shared across other views.
Yeah, let's apply that to our concepts from mod 1. So in mod 1, so we've talked about drying up code so far, but in mod 1, I think someone said it earlier, we were told methods shouldn't be longer than 5 lines. That's just kind of like a good marker of, if your method's longer than this, you should consider making a helper method. And it wasn't only when that code was repeated, it was just when your method got too long. Same exact thing for your views. If your view is just getting really long, like for instance, we're trying to have you make some application show pages that are really big and have a lot of different form elements on them, it would be a good idea to pull some of those out into partials. So yeah, it looks like Genevieve has here There's a submit application partial. There's an application pets partial. Yeah. So this show view, which was probably initially like 100 lines or something like that, is now broken down into smaller components. Or if I'm kind of using the language we read in the Rails guide, we're breaking it into subroutines. Yeah, I think this is a great example of how you can use partials in your project. So Genevieve, the answer is yes, that is okay to do. Even if you're not drawing up code, it still just breaks it down and makes it more manageable.
Right. I found a
Okay.
copy of the old one. If you still want to see it, it's like not working, but it looks like it has partials on it.
Sure, we can take a look.
Okay, for example, the main page is going to display all of that, and then it's broken up to the pet searches, and then the pet that is going to pull up, and essentially what pet I'm selecting. And this was all originally under the show page, but
yeah, so you broke it down even further here.
Not working, so I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to work on it today.
So that's okay if the exact implementation isn't working yet, but I think that's so when we looked at Genevieve's view, it was like there was a couple partials in there, but you can go really far like Brisa showed us, and you can have every single part of a page just be a partial. So there's one kind of like main view, which is your default rendered Rails view, and then there's a bunch of subpartials. So you can kind of think of it as like visually your different visual sections of your views. Let's go to Andrew.
I had a question about like the naming convention for creating like the partial view. In my project, it seemed like for the application show page, I wanted to render kind of like different pages depending on the application status. So if it's pending or in progress. So I did a render partial for like at application.status, but the status is a string, and in progress is 2 words. So I did underscore and then in space progress for that partial HTML file. And I didn't know if like there was a different way where I could rename it, or if having a space and like capitals in that file name is a bad thing to do.
I'm having a little trouble following verbally. Could you show us what you have?
Yeah, so I have, for the application show, render partial is going to go to application.status. So then depending on what the status is, it's going to render either my rejected, pending, in progress, or approved. But my in progress has a space and the file name. Because it's a string.
Interesting. Yeah, so maybe, okay, so just to be very clear about what Andrew's doing, at application.status is going to return to us a string, and then that string becomes the file name that the partial is looking for. So maybe what you could do here is, rather than just at application.status, maybe you make a helper method that's like status underscore partial, and that would handle the like string manipulation to return the file name in a better format. That's probably the way I would go about doing it. Because yeah, I think having spaces in the file names is probably not gonna work.
Yeah, I figured that was probably bad practice. Cool, that makes a lot of sense though, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would say this is like, that's a great application of I would say that's not necessarily something you have to do on your project, but this is cool. That's what else. Let's go to Adam.
This is just related to the form width, and I suspect I know what your answer is going to be. But I've looked at the API doc website and tried to look at the form width stuff, and it's like so confusing to figure out all the options. Do you know if like a better resource we can look to that will like break down the options a little bit more? Because it's just like too much, it feels like.
I don't have a specific resource outside of the Rails guides and the API docs. I would say those are like your 2 go-to places. But you know, a lot of times you read through documentation, and like you said, like there's just so many like options. I would probably just like Google and try to find some outside resources of just examples of how to use those options. I think there was a couple times in class where I think this happened the other day where I was like, okay, let me look at the docs, but then the docs aren't necessarily showing me what I want. A lot of times the docs are referencing other docs. So it's like, you can use any option under this category of options. And so then you've got to go read that documentation. So I guess my short answer is no, I don't have like other specific resources, but I would say it's totally fine to look on Stack Overflow or maybe find another repo that has an example of implementing that. Yeah, does that answer your question? Does Adam?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Ben.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if a partial is a good idea for taking, like, if you, for instance, if we have you know, an admin show page that has to pull stuff from the application, you know, what the application data is about. I'm wondering, is it better just to like pull, you know, the instance adder readers almost for the attributes around that application or whatever it is, or if it's a better idea to use like a partial to just straight up render part of like if, you know, if that application has a partial to like, and then the admin is rendering the partial from the application, or if that's just kind of too complicated and just to pull the regular instance variables from the application.
I'm not quite sure I followed you on that.
Okay.
Can you say it one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, so like if you have a regular application that has a show page that's using a partial and it's, you know, has all its name and address and description and all that stuff, and then you have the admin application show page.
Gotcha.
Is it better to use the partial from the regular application, or just to like pull its instance variable data stuff?
So in the case of, I don't know if this is like directly answering your question, but what I'll say about having the two different views for the applications is I would say it's better to just have, if the views are completely different, or not completely, but they're mostly different, I would say it's better to just have two different views rather than try to do some like fancy if logic to say like, if we're on the admin view, show this, otherwise show this. I think typically if the views are different enough, and I think they are for this project, I would just say you should have two different views.
Okay, cool, thanks.
You're welcome. So Jake, I see your hands up. I'm going to take, let's take a 5-minute POM next. And when we come back, I'm going to have you all continue to refactor your code implementing partials. And I'll kind of like stick around to answer questions or help you all out if you want to screen share and show me, and we can kind of like implement a partial in your project together. That's totally fine. And if you're feeling good about partials and you want to just like hop off, I would say that that's fine too. Just go ahead and fill out the survey if you are going to, if you're feeling good about partials and you want to move on to something else, please just fill out the survey before you head out. So if you are going to stick around, let's take a 5-minute POM, and Jake, I'll answer your question when we get back. So we'll come back. I'll be back at 11:13. All right. I'm going to get started again. Jake, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So obviously this question is kind of like a bit directly related to the project, but it was really cool seeing how like we could do the different stuff with forms, passing in parameters and arguments and like making it dynamic and all that kind of stuff. I guess my question is kind of like, where do we draw the line on like, this is similar enough to dry up, or this is like too dissimilar? And like the thing I'm thinking of specifically is like the adopting and rejecting pets, where like the way I have it now is it's like two different forms, where one form you can adopt or reject, or if that pet's already been approved on another application, the only button you see is the reject. So that's like a form with like, depending on conditionals, there's a different number of buttons that you can have. So
Yeah.
There's definitely a way to control that, where like if you pass in like a variable that's like, hey, check for this thing, and as long as you have access to that in controller, you can know what it's going to be, and then like change the buttons from there. Is that something we should be looking to do, or should we be like, no, this form like has a separate number of buttons, it should be separate functionality?
I think given what you're describing, it sounds like that should be a separate form. So like
Okay.
one version has different numbers of inputs. And so to just kind of like take that and make a more general statement, you don't want to there are trade-offs to refactoring. So it's not always the case that you always want to refactor into helper methods wherever you could possibly make a helper method. I think, Jake, what you're describing and what I kind of imagine is like, yeah, you could refactor into a single form, but that form would probably have some like if-else statements to control things, and like it would just get really complicated. So in trying to like quote unquote dry up your view, you actually end up like creating a more complex view. So I would say in that case, the trade-off is between complexity and repeated code. And it sounds like there's not enough repeated code to really make that worth it, make that refactor worth it. So sometimes refactors just aren't worth it. They're just like too big, too complex.
Yeah, that was like exactly my question, because like one of them is you have both buttons, one of them you only have one button, and then you would have to like have some conditional logic in the partial to know which button to take out or keep them both.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it sounds like that might be a little too complex. Before I go on to the next question, there was one other thing I wanted to address very quickly. So I posted a message yesterday afternoon for a survey that I want you all to complete, or that I need everybody to complete. We are going to be doing a Gear Up tomorrow based on that survey. So please, if you haven't already, take a look at that message and complete that survey. I did notice that, very similar to earlier this week, I posted a message and I asked you all to emoji with a check mark if you all had seen it, and I got a similar number of responses on both of them. So I think I got 20 and 21 respectively. So that is telling me there was maybe about like 8 or 9 people who didn't read that message or just didn't click the button. And I would really want to see 100% participation from you all on that. So if you haven't seen those messages, there were 2 this week where I asked you to please indicate that you had seen this. So please go back and find those if you didn't. And I would say, like, the other thing is just moving forward, please make sure that you're like checking Slack, that you're seeing all of those at 2011 backend student notifications, and that you're responding when you're asked to. And with that, let's go to Alex.
So what's testing strategy for partials?
Yeah, so I think maybe another question there is like, do you test the partials individually? And I would say, no, you don't have to. Really, your testing strategy shouldn't change that much. So we've used this keyword render a lot of times in this class and talking about partials. When it comes to rendering is just the process of all of your views being compiled into a single HTML document. So when you're rendering a partial, you're kind of just rendering another HTML document inside, or not an entire document, but you're rendering like a chunk of HTML inside more HTML. So at the end of the day, all our views, all of our views result in one single HTML document. So you don't need to change your testing strategy. You're still going to use your expect page to have content within these sections, click on this button, click on this link. It's just that the creation of the HTML document, now we're breaking it down into more steps of render this, and then inside this, render this. And you could render a partial inside a partial. And so then you'd have like a 3-step rendering process. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, that's good.
Jeremiah.
Yes. How do we do the, was it the value equals name again? Because on my edit, for instance, I test when that we do still have those values still the same when we push it to our edit page. And so I was going to do like the edit and HTML, or the edit and the new, to be both my form.
Is it, so this is the code that I wrote. Is what you're referring to something that we did here?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Locals, yeah.
Yeah, just changing the, okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Cool, and I can leave this up as we talk about through other questions. All right, so if there's no other immediate questions right now, I would say everybody keep working individually on your project and implementing partials. I'm happy to, if anyone is running into anything, any errors that you're stuck on, I'm happy to screen share and look at those together. And otherwise, we'll just kind of do work time for the rest of the morning. So feel free to fill out the survey whenever you get a chance, and you can hop off, you can stay on the call. Either way.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you all. Maybe another way to look at this next like 30 minutes is kind of like an open office hour. So like if there's other questions that come out besides partials, I'm happy to take those as well.
Brian, I think I have a little bit of a syntax question with the code that you have up right now.
Yeah.
I know initially we started with the underscore form, and that's how the file is named. For the syntax that you're using, could we replace the whole partial :form with just underscore form? And would that work?
So like this?
Yeah, but not in strings, just form. I'm not sure if that's how the initial way was that we were trying it.
So this is probably not going to work because just from Ruby, I would think that this would be looking for a local variable or method.
Okay.
But let's see. Let's close this out and run our tests. What do we get here? Yeah, undefined local variable or method underscore form. So yeah, just with like Ruby syntax, anything that's not like within a string or a number, that's like a basic Ruby data type, that would be treated as a local variable or method. Let me see if I can make it a string. What does this say? Missing partial. Yeah, it's trying to find, it's kind of hard to see because there's 2 underscores, but it's underscore form.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay.
If I just took that out, that work? Yeah. I'm not sure why that syntax doesn't work, but it seems like if you're trying to pass these local variables, you have to say partial and then the file name.
Okay.
Which I think that I also have a syntactic question on this. Like, why does this work this way? Why can't I just pass locals with the other syntax, whatever?
Okay, that makes sense. I was just curious. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's up?
So with the location of the form and like looking through the docs, if we're trying to, like in the example you're looking at for a set list, if we're trying to like replace like a new form that's for like a new artist and a new song, do we then need to create the new file that's shared and then tell the form to like go to the shared folder under views?
Yeah. So this example is probably not a good application of that, but I'll just use this just for the sake of example. So if I go back to the docs, I think I saw an example of that somewhere. Let me go back to the top here. So yeah, here we go. So this will render a file name. At that point, the view being rendered. Note that the leading underscore character parcels the name of the distinction of regular views, though they are referred to without the underscore. This holds true even when you're pulling a partial from another folder. So this code right here would render app views shared underscore menu.html.erb. Yeah, so I think if for whatever reason, maybe it's something like this, Jake. Maybe we want to have like, I don't know, maybe this is our song index, this is our playlist or this is our artist index. And maybe on both of them, we want to have a banner like, I don't know, welcome to setlist, something like that. This is a better example.
Or if there was like a form and you only wanted to allow the user to like update like one field, and so it was between like different models. So like if you wanted to just let someone like update like the name of the song and like the name of the artist, you could share that between the two views. And it would have to be like in your views, you'd have to have like a separate directory called like shared or whatever you wanted to name it.
Yeah. So I don't want to go to that form example just because that's like a little too complex, but just to show what we're trying to do, which is like render if they're not in the same folder, rendering it across different folders. So I could go over here and make a new folder under views called shared. And then underneath shared, make underscore, I don't know, maybe we'll call this like banner.html.erb.
Sure.
And then the syntax in my views would be, let's take it out of this view, put it over here in here. And then in this index view, I would want to say render, and then just following that syntax from the docs, shared / banner. So then I don't think I'll have a test that will check that, but we could go over here to our artist index. And I see that banner, and then let's go to songs. And I don't see that banner. I think that's because I just didn't.
Add it to songs.
Yeah, let me just take that, put it here. And there it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this would apply for any folder. So this is I made a shared folder here. This makes sense because it's shared across multiple views. But if for whatever reason, maybe I want to have something like this where I just create like, I don't know, we'll just call it underscore artist.html.erb. And so if I go into maybe like an index, I could maybe pull out this specific code and put it into a partial to say, this is how I render a single artist. But then maybe I also want to view what the artist is when we're going over the song index. So then over here in the song index, maybe I also want to add in here, like, I don't know, p artist, something like that. And then in here, I could render artists, and then this would be artist. The partial name is artist.
And you wouldn't have to go back up to, views because you don't have to go up one level to artist and then into like that artist.html view.
So don't think of this so much as like we're inside, because this is the songs index, we're in the songs folder. So we have to like go out of the songs folder. You're kind of thinking, I think you are thinking of it as like navigating in the terminal, navigating a hierarchy. Really, this syntax because it's rendering a view, infers app views, and then it's folder name within app views. So this is app views artists. So you can point it to any folder from really anywhere in your application. So even if we're inside another partial, something like this, I could render another partial from within this partial and just point it to, I don't know, let's point it to playlist now.
Sure, but just like in some of the other ones, you weren't putting the directory, you were just putting in like the HTML file.
Yeah, and that was because we were within that same folder.
Yeah, and that's what I meant.
Yeah, I think you've got it. If you're within the folder, it will infer that you want to render something in the same folder, but if not, it'll just infer that you're going from app views. If you specify the folder, it'll just start looking from app views.
Yeah, sure. And just as an aside, like this project, like it was a bit of a joke, right? Like we're supposed to fail it?
No.
Okay.
I would say it is a difficult project.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess like just for y'all who are still here, for this project, you know, this project is difficult. We asked you to do a lot of things, but the learning is the most important. So if you are really struggling with, I'm not going to finish this entire project tonight, I would say like focus on those learning goals of many-to-many relationships. Let me actually just go to the project page.
And actually, based on what Jameson said earlier today, I'm kind of like changing my approach for like the work I have left today. I'm on the AR stories portion now, and like I spent hours trying to get through it yesterday, and I think I'm going to change my approach. Instead of like trying to finish those stories, like go back and refactor and like make things the way they should be, and then like hopefully just have time to like do the AR exercises like over the weekend maybe or something like that.
Yeah, so I would say like looking at our learning goals here, use Active Record to write queries that join multiple tables of data together. That's the second goal we have there. So I would say try to get like at least one or two of those stories under your belt, implement a join somewhere in the project. Yeah. But I think most of this other stuff, yeah, I would say like these two are the most important ones here. The many-to-many relationship and the Active Record are the real like understandings. I'd say the other things are like, we want you to have done these things in Rails just because they are used, probably not that much, but at least these parts like validations, flash messages, partials, all of those are like, those are very common Rails things that we want you to get experience with.
Okay, so back to the plan. I'm trying to do everything tonight. Got it. Thanks.
Hey, Brian, I had a question. I've been thinking about kind of ways that I can implement some more partials and really kind of shared partials. I think you might have answered this question earlier, but I'm not sure if I processed it. Give me 1 second. Let me share my screen here. I think, nope, I want that desktop. Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm curious about is, for example, when I have like, let's say my new html.erb under shelters, and then also have the new for applications. I I kind of differed my data a little bit in the sense that I decided to store first name and last name as separate values. So what I was curious about is that otherwise the address and all of this other behavior really seems to remain the same. Does it make sense to have a partial that I only use and I extract all of these pieces out, let's say, for the new and edit on applications? Or do I maybe create an address partial that I could then share across 4 different views, meaning like new, edit for both applications and shelters?
Can you, I'm not sure if I quite followed that. So I think both of these are the new, oh, no, this is new for shelter and, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
new shelter, new application. And the only thing that differs is essentially these fields right here, right? Last name and first name are stored only on the application, but on the partial, it's name. But address and everything else really is kind of shared across the 2. So what I'm curious is, does it make sense to create maybe an address form that I can then share across shelter and application? Or just have a form where I extract all of these pieces out like a partial for applications and only use it on the new and the edit within applications?
Yeah, I would say that there's not an obvious right answer here. The one, so
Okay.
when it comes to pulling out the address, because that's not, you wouldn't be making a separate form because those are elements, those are input elements within that form. So rather than pulling out the form, you would just be pulling out, let me grab my highlighter here. You would just be pulling out these labels and text fields. I don't know. I think either one would be fine. I think it would also be okay to just have a different form for each one. If it were me, I would probably go the route of creating a partial for the form and not worrying about the duplicate code between the address stuff.
Okay.
I would say
that was
that's
where
okay.
I was leaning.
And I think that gets at Jake's point earlier that like sometimes it's just not worth it to dry up code. Like sometimes it's just, I need to repeat this code because I need it in multiple places. And there's not a great way to do it. And we would probably, it might get a little bit too complicated if we did try to dry it up.
Got it. Okay. That helps. Thank you.
The last thing I'll say is you could do both. Like you could refactor into a form for both address and application. And within each of those have those separate partials for the address stuff.
That sounds like a rabbit hole I am not prepared to go down to today, but maybe I will give it a try.
Sounds right.
Hey, Brad. It's because if you have a second to try and walk me through the first stages of this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So it started by breaking off the form _form.html.erb. It's over here.
Sorry, I'm trying to find my shared screen. There it is. Okay.
And let me know if I can enlarge anything.
No, that looks good.
Okay. Yeah, I started over here creating this, and then I added in both, I think, were my 2 candidates for my show HTML, the form width, kind of here, and then again over here. I can refactor these lines on top there as well, but that's a different thing, I suppose. And I brought them over here to compare them like you did. And they look pretty similar. I'm just not sure again on what the next step is, I suppose.
Yeah. So the top form is to search for a pet, right? And then the bottom one is to submit the application?
Yeah. Submit the application, a description of the, it submits the description of the applicant and then changes the status to pending from in progress.
So I think the first thing that I would do is take one of them out. So maybe the bottom one.
As in on which side?
On the right pane.
On the right
from our
page?
underscore. Yeah.
Get rid of
so
it or just comment it out?
we can comment it out. Yeah, that works.
Oh, that
So
actually
we,
worked. HTML.
yeah,
because it's ERB, that's why. Okay.
One thing, this is kind of a side note here, but one thing with HTML comments is it doesn't stop your Ruby code from being run. It just prevents those HTML elements from being viewable. So if you have an error inside that form, that would still trigger. But I think we should be, okay. So let's try to render that partial in our where we're searching for it, which I guess is at the top on the left pane. Yeah.
You said render it where, like over here? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let's take that out of the view,
okay.
which I guess is 19 to 23.
Yep. And that we're gonna have to.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna
do this. Probably copy it just in case.
Yeah. And let's do. Okay, so let's try to render that partial now. So what I want to do is like do one at a time rather than try to do everything at once.
Okay.
So let's do a visible ERB tag here. And then we'll say render.
Is that on the tag or off?
It doesn't matter, but I think just syntactically, it's nice to have a space.
Okay.
Render. So when it comes to thinking about syntax within those ERB tags, it's just Ruby code. So any syntax from Ruby, we would apply here as well.
Okay.
So let's then say, let's give it a keyword of partial. So partial colon.
Keyword, and then is that going to go colon here or sorry?
So we'll do a space.
Space.
And so what we're doing is we're passing a keyword argument to the render method. Yep. So that was good. And then we'll give it a string with the name of our partial, which looks like form.
And then that string name of our partial, you said that's form or?
Yes, it's form. And we don't include the underscore when it comes to partial names. Or when we're referencing a partial. Cool, let's see if that will
You do include it in the name though?
Yeah, so the file name has the underscore, but when we reference the file name, it doesn't.
Okay.
Can we run tests? Will this, let's see what happens.
Sure. Oh, wow.
Cool, so that looked good. Just as a sanity check, where you say render, I just want to put an error in here. So maybe let's change that method up in the top right. Let's change that to something else. So rather than a get, maybe just make it a post or something.
Oh,
I want to make sure that our tests are catching the mistakes that we make.
Okay. I also had a question, I guess, about this might be separate, but why that one I had as a symbol and then the patch down here was as a string. But
yeah, just real quick. A lot of times in Ruby, symbols and strings are interchangeable.
Okay, that's sorry about that. Okay, so it's not working, and then now it should work again.
Yep. So what we've done is we've successfully rendered a partial from the view, but we haven't reused it. So now let's uncomment the form below it. And let's try to identify what is different between these two. So I'll let you describe that to me.
It looks like we have the URL is actually the same, which is cool. So I guess we can leave those. Then we have what we were just talking about here, the cred stuff.
Cool. So let's replace that method with a local variable.
Okay, and this should be a certain name.
You can name it whatever you want, but because it's the argument to the method keyword, I think method would be a good choice.
All right.
And method is synonymous with verb. So HTTP verb, HTTP method, those are the same.
Got it. Cool.
Okay, let's keep going. What else is is different between these two?
Next there, the difference, the actual label we have here.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe just change it to label.
Sure.
Or is that, I'm not sure if that's confusing because that's also named label.
And kind of what I'm starting to that I didn't quite realize when we started doing this is it's starting to feel like the differences between these two forms kind of make this not a great candidate for partials, because these two forms really do completely different things, right? Like one of them searches for a pet and one of them submits the application. So I'd say because they're doing two things, we don't necessarily need to refactor this into a partial. So I think
Okay.
what I might do is just Command Z a little bit backwards and take out that bottom form. Yeah. And I think just like that would be fine. So now your view is simpler. Now we have
just this.
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, saying we have just this now. And
yeah, exactly. And so maybe another good refactor would be to take this header and put it over here as well, because it looks like that header is specific to this form. So we'll just move that over. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, that was one of the things Trevor had mentioned and Quad mentioned, is what basically that header there, and then this one down here as well to go along with that one. But I was wondering if I could I do basically these separately in the same way that I'm doing this and those over there?
Yeah, and I think that would be moving towards kind of what Genevieve and Brisa showed us earlier, where we're not necessarily drying up repeated code, but we are just breaking our view down into more readable components, smaller components.
Yeah, okay. And so this one, I'm sorry, what I just said, it's like a variable, yes, or
which where you
the line 17 right here and show HTML.
If add application.says
taking that, putting over here.
Yeah, so I think that's not going to be a good strategy, because we need that if statement in our main view to determine if we should render this partial at all. So I would say leave that in the main view and just move that header from line 18 in your view over to the top of the form. Yeah.
This one.
So let's cut that and then put it at the top of your partial form.
All right. Okay. So leave this then?
Yeah, I think that looks good. What is that section tag? Where is that?
It starts up here, and I had initially done it. It was like one of the first things I did, and I hadn't removed it. I was thinking to use it initially for like testing, like we had talked about, using within stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had never used it. So I'm not sure if it's actually doing anything right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would say that section tag probably belongs somewhere else. So if that goes with this application ID, where is the end of the application? I think the end of the application is actually a little bit further down.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
Down here.
I might even put that section tag all the way at the bottom here, because it looks like that is all application information.
Both parts of it, or are you saying just the bottom part?
I think the start, so you can think of it as like start and end. So I think that it starts in a good place. Actually, maybe we want to start it just one above.
Yeah, put the name in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think everything else is part of that section as well.
And like that?
Yeah. And then let's go back up to that if statement that you had. Yeah. So now this is much more readable, right? Like if the application is in progress, render, and then maybe what I would do is refactor this, just the name of this. So maybe I would actually call this search form, because underscore form is not very descriptive. So you could call it search form, maybe even pet search would be a better name.
Oh, and not have form at all?
Yeah. I guess we don't need form. And so then if you run your test, we should see some failures because we don't have that file. Bunch of failures. So now we'll rename it.
Here.
Now let's run our test. Cool. So you missed one thing.
Oh,
we need
yep,
we need the
leading.
underscore. Yep.
Yeah. That's a relief. And you know it's wrong. Oh shoot.
Yeah, I don't know if I got it. Oh, yep. Looks like you hit enter in time.
Yeah, right. That's strange.
Yeah, so now this is looking much more readable to me. Me as another developer, I can come in here and I can say, okay, well, what are these 3 lines doing? If the application's in progress, we're going to show a pet search. So it looks like we can search as long as the app is in progress. So this is much more readable now, right?
Sure. I feel like I need to go through here and like adjust the way indentations and stuff work. But yeah, in general, also, it's just less clutter everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So as we mentioned, just for strict readability purposes, I could refactor this as well. The same way. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple refactors. One is to you can pull out the form into its own partial, like we talked about. And then I think in the MVC class, Jameson talked about how this whole line of code, that's a lot of logic in your view. Maybe you refactor it into another application method. Maybe it's like application dot, I think I would call this submittable ? Because that's what we're trying to determine, right? Can you submit this? So if your view becomes if add application dot submittable render submit application form, that's all of a sudden much more readable than this big line and then all that form junk.
Yeah, absolutely. It tells you what it's doing. So that would just, and you do that, would it be a method in the model, or would you be able to just set that line of code equal to a variable, or does it have to be actually in a?
I would make this a model method because look at right here, we're doing some, that I would say this is data logic, find the associated pet records and count them. That is very much data logic. And checking the application status, well, this is stored on that application record. So that is all very much model data logic. So I'd say that's appropriate according to our MVC principles. And then I guess one other thing to note here is both of these conditions start with at application. So whatever you start the method call with, that's usually a good first guess of where should you put that method. So because this is an application instance, I would probably choose application instance method.
Got it. And I guess just to clarify, you wouldn't be able to make it just set it to a variable. It has to be an actual method that you put that in.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to set it equal to a variable because then that would be like making your, I mean, I guess you could set it to a variable, but I would, if you're going to set a variable, set it in the controller. Don't set variables in your views because that kind of goes along with making your views more complicated.
Yeah, I was thinking about setting the variable in the model, but you said if I was to do that, I would do that in the controller, but I should probably just go ahead and do a method in the model.
Yeah, you can't really set it. Think of your models as kind of like your objects from mod 1, the classes that you made in mod 1, and you're not really like setting variables in there so much. You want to prefer using the return values rather than setting up more variables. We already have enough variables. What we want to do is we want to use those variables to make some sort of determination or decision for us.
Got it. Cool. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I think that was a great thing for us to work through together. I think from some other folks, we saw like, I would say we saw more of like the end product of the refactoring, but that was good for us to like go through together and have on the recording for like the process of making that refactor.
For sure. Thank you again.
All right, y'all. Thank you very much for sticking with me. I'm going to close out this meeting.
Cool. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.